Okay, I think we're live.
All right. Welcome, everyone. We see you all trickling in. Excited to see some familiar names on this list. Just so you all know, this webinar is being recorded, so you have to jump off at any point. The recording will be available to all registrants following the webinar. This is our second webinar series in the IRWM SGMA series, and it's hosted by Maven's Notebook, Local Government Commission, and the Roundtable of Regions. We plan on hosting this series over the next year to elevate how IRWM, the Integrated Regional Water Management Program, and the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, can better coordinate. And we'll be discussing a range of topics over the next year. And I can share the link in the chat to our first webinar that we held last fall. And we'll get a pulse check from you all later on today on what other topics you'd like to see us discuss in this webinar series. Before I begin, for those that aren't familiar with Local Government Commission, we're a statewide nonprofit supporting local governments to implement sustainable development across water, community design, energy, and climate change. I want to give a quick plug for a program that may be of interest to some of you that we're hosting right now. It's the California Growing Water SMART program. We're currently seeking letters of interest from communities that want to participate. Growing Water SMART brings together land use planners, water managers, and elected leaders to collaborate and strategize on how to address local water challenges that influence their growth and development, much of which is happening through Gsas and IRWM regions right now. So I'll post a quick link in the chat. And speaking of the chat, we'll be sharing resources and links throughout today's webinar, so keep an eye on that. We'll also include those resources in our follow-up email. And with that, I will turn things over to Chris Maven Austin, who is the thought leader and talented journalist behind Maven's Notebook and the Groundwater Exchange. Go ahead, Chris.
Hey, thank you, Emily. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Chris Austin. I'm otherwise known as Maven, and I publish Maven's Notebook, which, for those of you who are not familiar, is a website devoted to California water news and information. 6 days a week, I publish an aggregation of California water news from across the state. But of course, Maven's Notebook is much more than just a news aggregator. I also cover meetings such as the State Water Board, the California Water Commission, the Delta Stewardship Council, and conferences and webinars. So you can check it out at mavensnotebook.com. I also publish and maintain a website called the Groundwater Exchange, which brings together resources for implementing the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and puts them in one place. With the help of the Local Government Commission, we have been working to update the website. So there is a new video gallery and new resources in Spanish, and also the Google Translate add-in has been added to the website, so you can go in multiple languages now. We will soon be restructuring the main page to accommodate the new pages and resources, so be sure to check back in the coming months. And don't forget to sign up for the bi-weekly SGMA implementation news. And Emily's going to put those links in the chat for you. So to understand your affiliation as a participant of the webinar today, we're going to launch a poll. So if you would please select the option that best describes you. Now, Zoom is probably old hat to most of you, but while we're waiting for everyone to fill out the poll, let's review the best way you can participate in this webinar. So everyone is automatically muted when joining, and to ask a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the panel to submit your question. If someone has asked a question you're interested in, you can upvote that question by clicking on the thumbs up below the question, and that will let us know the question that people are most interested in. And we'll have plenty of time for audience Q&A after the panel discussion. So it looks like most people have answered. So looks like a lot of you joining us from a wide variety of people. So welcome everybody. And now I'll turn it over to our moderator, Lynn Rodriguez. She is the IRWM Program Manager for the Watersheds Coalition of Ventura County. Take it away, Lynn.
Thank you, Chris and Emily, and welcome everybody to this second of our webinars in the series. Today we'll be focusing on collaborative project development across SGMA and IRWM. We're really excited to have you all here today. To better understand your background, we're going to launch another poll to ask you about your participation in or knowledge of IRWM and SGMA. It looks like you launched that yet, Chris?
Yeah, I'm trying to find the second question. Oh, okay, there we go. I'm sorry. Here we go.
We have used the results of the polls from the previous first event that we held. Really helps us to better understand how to plan these events, to know where you're coming from, and also for the panel members to know who's on the call today. So thank you for your patience with the polls.
People are still voting.
Okay. While you're doing that, I just wanted to mention that I looked at the list of people who registered for this event, and I'm extremely impressed with the diversity of people and who you represent. Everything from universities to state agencies to local, a lot of different local entities, cities, counties, GSAs, IRWM regions. We have students and Civic Spark fellows and many and some businesses and agricultural interests and tribal interests. So very impressive group of people today tuning in, and we look forward to questions that you might have when we're done with the panel this afternoon. Okay, so we are so excited today to have a great panel of folks with a great depth of experience and work in either GSA, groundwater sustainability, and or integrated regional water management. Today, we're going to talk about how GSAs can collaborate with IRWM regions to develop and fund multi-benefit projects and programs. So the experts that we have today on our panel include Jeannie, Habben, Matt Zidar, and Arne Anselm. We don't have time to go through and introduce their full bios, but I'll just quickly say Jeannie is the Deputy Director of Water and Natural Resources for Madera County, and it has many years of experience working in IRWM and groundwater management. Then we have Matt Zidar, who is currently the Water Resources Manager for San Joaquin County Department of Public Works. Matt also has many, many years of experience working in both IRWM and groundwater and other water management. And then Arne Anselm, who's the Deputy Director for Ventura County Water Resources, and also lead for the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, which is a GMA that's been around since the mid-1980s. And he also has a background working in a lot of other issues, stormwater and other issues at the county. So without further ado, I want to just jump right into this panel. It's going to be really exciting to hear from all of them. So my role, just really quickly, is I'm a program manager for the Integrated Regional Water Management Program in Ventura County since 2005. The County of Ventura hosts the program, but it's a collaboration between all of the entities within the county that participate in our IRWM program. The format today is that we will start with a few prepared questions that each panel member will respond to and share their experiences leveraging collaboration across SGMA and IRWM. And then we'll turn to audience Q&A. So hold on to your questions. You can certainly post your questions in the Q&A anytime you want, and then we will make time at the end to respond to those questions. Hopefully the presenters can do that verbally, but if not, there'll be written responses that get posted to those questions. So with that, we'll get started with Jeannie, and she is going to provide a 3-minute overview about how have you been involved in both IRWM and SGMA, and please be specific about which region and basins you're working in. Thank you, Jeannie.
Okay, thank you. As Lynn has said, I am Deputy Director of Water and Natural Resources at Madera County. And prior to being Deputy Director here, I worked in watershed work for 2 decades now, working with Madera County, but not for Madera County. And with that, I have worked with the IRWM since its inception. I started working with the IRWM, I guess, back in 2004 when it started being when they were looking at legislation. And then when Madera County received the funding for the first grant in 2006, I assisted in writing the grant and assisted Madera County in putting together their plan. Their plan was put together in 2008. And since then, we formed the Regional Water Management Group in 2010. And then the region was approved in 2011. So working with them all along, even into the next 2 updates, which was 2014 and 2019. That's the Madera region, which happens to be the actual borders of Madera County, which is unusual. Most of them, the regions are watershed based, but we actually got ours to be county based. I also assisted Yosemite Mariposa in their watershed and in their plan, and Southern Sierra with their plan. So Madera County happens to have, or the Madera region happens to have 12 voting members and 4 DACs currently involved, but anybody, of course, is allowed to be a part of it. When rumblings of SGMA began about 10 years later, which was 2016, we then kind of switched over in the Groundwater Committee portion of the region, started working on SGMA. So I've become involved in SGMA more officially since I started working with the county. And that's a whole other, as everyone knows, a whole other system. We have 3 subbasins. And that's the Madera, the Chowchilla, and the Delta Mendota subbasin. Within those subbasins, we have 7 plans total. We have 7 GSAs and 4 plans in the Madera subbasin. We have 4 GSAs and 1 plan in the Chowchilla subbasin. And then we have 2 GSAs and 2 GSPs in the Delta Mendota portion that we're involved with. In looking at all of that, the county itself is responsible for the county GSAs, which is considered the white area. I hate that term, but it's what shows up white on a map. And that's about 215 acres that we are kind of the, I guess, the new water district for. The importance I found with the benefits of IRWM towards the GSAs and SGMA is the relationships that were already formed. Since IRWM had been working with the area, the region, the county, for 10 years prior to the SGMA being formed or becoming a law, we already had those relationships. We've worked out, hammering out projects, bylaws, MOUs, working with other IRWMs or other regions. And a lot of the players are the same. They just need to wrap their head around something new that's now a law. IRWM was highly recommended by the state, where the SGMA is a law. So same players and new tasks. So the interesting thing about the region was for a short time, because of this being a law, the IRWM in the valley got put on the back burner because our region has both the foothills and the valley. So we just have to keep in mind whenever we're doing projects and whenever we're doing any planning that we have that foothills region, which is the Mountain County area, funding area, that is totally different than the valley because it doesn't have aquifers, it doesn't have the same issues. And then we have the valley, which does have the aquifer and does have SGMA and all of that. So keeping those 2 things in line. Yes, that's it. Did I use up my time?
Yes, thank you, Jeannie. That was great. We're hearing some sort of strange sounds like notifications coming through, and it must be from your computer because the rest of us are muted. So if you could
We'll mute.
turn off when you're talking. I mean, unfortunately, we want to hear you when it's your turn to
Right.
speak. So if you can figure out a way to
Roll
quiet
it.
those down, that'd be great. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's move on now to Matt. Matt, can you share some of your information with us about the regions you work in? I know you've worked in more than the one you're in now, so, but if you want to highlight where you are now, that would be great.
I've been involved in integrated resource planning since the days in the Salinas Valley, starting about '87, doing the big multi-objective basin scale plans. And way back then, it was really, the least cost engineering kind of preferred alternative selection from a range of structural things with some paying attention to non-structural management alternatives. And that was the big part of my early career, both there and in the Pajaro Valley, where I was the manager of the Water Resource Division at Monterey County. And then I went into the private sector doing big environmental documents where you're doing a lot of alternatives evaluation, screening, and things for purposes of CEQA and NEPA. So evaluating, defining a problem, setting goals and objectives in its simplest form, defining alternatives, coming up with a criteria to screen and rank and weigh those, and then coming up with a preferred set of solutions. Moving on into the groundwater management plan area, the AB 303s and SB 1938 groundwater management plans, did a bunch of those in Kings and participated in a bunch of them up and down mostly the San Joaquin Valley, a little bit of coastal work. And then the IRWM machine got rolling, and I was the lead on the Kings Basin for the original Prop 50 and put that one together, which was a ton of fun. And then worked in the Imperial Valley on an IRP, which we ultimately became an IRWMP. And that was probably one of the most challenging planning environments I'd worked in. Been involved as an editor or reviewer, or had specific parts of the YOLO, the Yuba, the Casumnes, the CABI, they call it Casumnes, American Bear and Yuba, and the Gateway Cities, an urban one down in LA, which was a lot of fun. Having that background, it was easy to slide right into Sigma. And I kind of came out of retirement, went back to work in San Joaquin to help manage the East San Joaquin GSP development and manage the groundwater authority there that was formed, a joint powers authority to do that. I'm currently working on a medium priority basin, the Tracy sub-basin, which is the northern end of the Delta Mendota and the whole western part of San Joaquin County. So a lot of Delta. And that one's going to be due this January. But been involved in that kind of basin scale, integrated multi-objective planning for a while. And never bored.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt, for that background. Now moving to more the southern end of the state, or closer to the south, we have Arne Anselm from the County of Ventura. And Arne, it's all yours.
Thanks, Lynn. Arne Anselm, Ventura County Public Works Agency. So IRWM predates Sigma by about a dozen years or so. So my first involvement was with IRWM when I started in the East County managing stormwater programs, and our focus was water quality. And we had TMDLs, total maximum daily loads. Those are regulations to control surface water pollutants. Groups started getting together to work together on those TMDLs and through watershed scale, and that dovetailed real nicely with IRWM when it came into existence. And with the funding provided by IRWM, it was definitely helpful at that time. I do have to say Ventura County, that's our region, has been extremely successful in getting funding through IRWM, mostly because of how well they all work together to identify the projects that are meeting the needs of the priority needs of the region. And when IRWM impacted my current agency, I technically work for the Ventura County Watershed Protection District, which used to be called flood control. So IRWM, I think, was one of the big kicks to get that broader scope to address the broader array of problems other than just water quantity in flooding, but to address everything else that comes along with it. SGMA, when it came through, had a huge impact on the county and my agency. We have 11 basins subject to SGMA. 3 of them are critically overdrafted, so they're on the fast track. The county, with this land use authority, took the lead in the formation of GSAs and ensuring all the white areas are covered. And we now have representation on 9 of those GSA boards. The county also provides the staffing services to the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency. And Kim mentioned it's been around since the 80s. And that includes the Las Posas Basin, parts of the Arroyo Santa Rosa Basin, and then the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley Basins. Those 2 are critically overdrafted. And the county also has a Kiwama Basin, which is another critically overdrafted basin on that fast track. So our engagement is across the county and across the board there.
Great, thank you, Arne. Well, one of the great things about our panel today is is the representation from various parts of the state. All of those areas you represent have a significant amount of groundwater use and overdraft concerns and other concerns driving the GSPs. So, and a lot of agriculture. So there's some similarity there, and it's great to have all 3 of you with the breadth of experience you have to bring to this discussion. So now we're going to get into sort of the meat of our discussion, which is the kinds of projects that you're developing and how you've worked towards getting when your plans are complete, how you're going to actually reach sustainability within your region and work with the IRWM planning effort to get those projects included into that process as well. So now we're going to focus on what are the key types of projects for each of you to address this question. What are the key types of projects that have been identified for your GSP and to achieve sustainability, and how do those projects align with your IRWM plan? And if you have a little time also to address what criteria is your GSP or GSA using to select projects that move forward. So I'm just going to work back through, one at a time, and you each have about 6 to 7 minutes. And I'll let you know if you start to run short of time, because I know there's a lot you could cover. So Jeannie, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, our projects, they all align. We've been working, this kind of goes into the other question also, but they align perfectly with what we do, because we both have the IRWM projects and we have stormwater projects. The stormwater plan is part of our IRWM, and it is both flood-based or water-based. So the kind of plans that we have or projects that we have is importing water, recharge, more recharge, and more recharge. There's a lot of that going on. And we're working on some additional projects currently with our GSP, such as we're doing a simulation water market. Right now, we're doing a recharge project. We are also doing a rate study, recharge study, water market simulation, sustainable agricultural land conservation project, creation of the data management system, and satellite measurement. So all of that with the projects that have been put through, they all work with that. So mostly we all have the same GSA projects with the IRWM and the Stormwater Resource Plan.
Jeannie, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
It's possible that the noise coming through your computer is from either chat applications or emails that you're getting? No?
It's not.
It's not?
And
Okay.
it's nothing that I can do
You have
anything. Actually, what that is, and I apologize, is that's my internet turning on and off.
Oh,
Yeah, so I'm gonna work with that.
okay.
Hopefully,
All right,
hopefully I won't get lost.
Okay, thanks for letting us.
Yeah. And I'm done with my questions. So if the next person wants to start.
All right, thank you so much. Okay. Matt, well, yes, Matt, you're next.
In our GSP, we're really looking at carrying on traditional planning and things that came out of the 2012 IRWMP, which was just recently updated via an addendum to meet the comments we got in 2012 and the standards adopted in 2016. We just adopted that revised addendum IRWMP that included all of the things that came out of the East San Joaquin Groundwater Sustainability Plan. And that was one plan prepared by and supported by 16 separate GSAs. So a lot of the types of projects are coming out of those GSAs specifically towards conjunctive use. There was this integrated conjunctive use program that came out of the IRWM that is kind of the basis for the management approach for structural solutions, which is taking floodwater, any right in entitlement, and trying to get it into the groundwater basins. So it's really answering the questions, what water down what facilities existing or new to what properties, either for in lieu, direct recharge, or flood marsh spreading types of operation. Each of the GSAs is leading the capital project development. The GWA is working hard to figure out how to manage the asset of the 1 to 2 million acre feet of available groundwater storage, and then doing things like working to assure common methods, data, and assumptions are being applied, doing the annual reporting, organizing all of the efforts of the technical advisory committee, the steering committee, and then the groundwater authority. Those projects align well with our IRWM because all of the GSP projects also went into the IRWM. Being a flood control and water conservation district, we're also heavily engaged in the Lower San Joaquin Regional Flood Management Plan and all the capital improvements and levee improvements and things that came out of that. So everything in the regional flood control capital plan also went into the IRWMP. So everything East San Joaquin GSP and everything Lower San Joaquin in terms of flood and the big conjunctive use water supply projects are in the updated IRWMP now. The GSP really is the water supply centric to deal with the critical overdraft. The IRWMP then is the more multi-objective, broader plan that thinks more about wastewater reclamation, reuse, recycling, some of the what everybody else is doing in terms of demand management. And everybody that's participating in that is currently updating their agricultural and urban water management plans on that 5-year cycle. And we're trying to figure out how to integrate those. Integrating plans as well as meeting multiple objectives is one of the tricks to both the SGMA and the IRWM integration. So in a number of these plans I've been involved with, the basis for our demand forecasting has always been the adopted general plan. And you use that to say what the current future demands are. And you look to say, are any of these plans recognizing any of the requirements, the general plans, the land use plans? Do they have the things that you know you want to see in the IRWMP? And in some places, like I think Ventura County down there, the urban water management plans and some of the general plan were brought right into the general plan. So there was a logical connection between urban water management, the land use planning, and then bringing the different land use plans into the SGMA or the IRWM documents, and looking and doing a study of the consistency between the policies that you are looking to implement, say as a non-structural management alternative, any of the IRWM or SGMA GSP types of documents, saying, can we get some consistency, at least in the goals and objectives level, between all those different plans, urban water management, ag water management, the land use plans that prevail, the ones that you're crafting specifically to meet the SGMA goals and objectives. Criteria, I might talk about that. I know I've got a part of the question on the tangible, intangible benefits, and I think I'll save the criteria thing in the interest of time and not being a hog for the time, which everybody knows I can do really well.
All right, thank you, Matt, and thank you for addressing some of those other plans that are part of the landscape that we're all operating in. Appreciate that. All right, Arne.
Thanks, Lynn. So type of projects to achieve sustainable yield, I'll break it out into 3 categories. There's new water, whether you're capturing new water from runoff or importing water. Those are big capital improvement projects. There's optimization. That's without bringing in new water, moving the pumping around the basin. So you move pumping away from a seawater intrusion area, or you move it away from a depression. Sounds simple enough, but those are projects, they're big infrastructure pipelines, which can be quite expensive. And new wells to get the pumping where you want it. And then there's conservation, which is the simple, not simple, shouldn't call it simple, but there's irrigation efficiencies for sure, but they could also be fallowing, which is a big deal, and everybody really would like to avoid that and focus on the projects that improve yield. How do they align with the IRWM plan? Their projects need to be, any capture project needs to be in a stormwater resource plan, which is, I forget, a few years old, and it's a state requirement to be eligible for grant funding. So a capture project needs to be in the stormwater resource plan, and the stormwater resource plan is an addendum attachment to the IRWM, and I think vice versa. I think we attach the IRWM to our stormwater resource plan. Optimization projects, moving pumping around, wouldn't be a capture project. It wouldn't be subject to that, and those would be in the IRWM. And conservation could be in the IRWM, depending on how it works. If it's irrigation efficiency, new irrigating equipment, weather stations, such like that, could work with the IRWM plan. And certainly the funding for large projects, large multi-benefit projects, really is where the IRWM process helps out to get all those varied interests of what's important to them, and how can we get the most bang for our buck, the most water for our buck through those types of projects, and then get the public support and get funding support for that. The criteria for Gsas used to select projects involved in several Gsas, and it varies from, everybody needed to follow the DWR guidance and what they can include. Though I will say some were a bit more aspirational in what they think they could get in the next 5-10 years as far as a project. Some areas are challenged, as I mentioned, the Kuama Basin up north. They have very little water infrastructure in the area. They have no other sources of water, so their projects are very limited, and so they were looking wherever they could to make the most of what they had in that area. For Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, they took a very conservative approach. They wanted real projects with a real champion who's going to make sure the funding is there, make sure it can get built, and make sure it's a reality if we're going to count that towards our sustainable yield.
Okay, thank you so much, Arne. There's a couple of questions in the chat that we may want to take now really quick, because we're a little ahead of schedule. The first one, or one of the questions is, can someone explain the difference between structural and non-structural projects or solutions? And I'm not sure who said that, if that was Matt or Jeannie or Arne, but does one of you want to address that?
I'll touch it. I did say that, and I've always used that as a conceptual breakout of capital improvements plans that are like the bonded type of brick and mortar as structural solutions. Non-structural would be, say, creating water markets, coming up with water conservation, applying your regulatory powers and authorities, encouraging, say, on-farm best management practices to percolate water, reduce nitrate leaching, encouraging others to do things through policy. So it's kind of like the capital project versus policy or management solutions.
Thank you. There was another question that you also just touched on it about some detail on the water market. Do you want to address that one, Matt? You're muted.
Yeah, we are not looking to develop water markets because we're not really managing or allocating shortage. I think Jeannie has probably got the best on that one.
Yes, that was me. We are doing a simulation of a water market right now where it's within our GSA that we're working. And we have about 50 different landowners signed up, and we've got it to where we're looking at a whole year within a few months. So we're changing all the variables and seeing how it'll work out. It's nothing that's down in stone yet, but it's something that we're working on currently.
Okay, thank you, Jeannie. Arne, do you want to talk? I know that might take too long to go into detail on the marketing, the water markets for the GMA. Did you want to say anything about it?
Yes, we have a water market. I can go into a lot of details. It has been a challenge to get it up and running. It took a lot of trust amongst the farmers. We needed AMI, advanced metering infrastructure. So everybody was certain that the meters were reporting and the water was there available to trade. And it's been a pilot program through the Nature Conservancy. They got a conservation innovation grant through NRCS, and it's the growers appreciate it, but it's not their priority. I'll say it that way. Once cuts start happening, once we start the ramp down or the glide path towards sustainability, it probably would be a very useful tool for growers going forward.
Okay, thank you, Arne. Okay, so we're going to move on to our third question, and keep your questions coming. Sometimes we can address them as we go, and the rest will hold for when we're done. So the last question, we're going to have each panelist answer a different question, and starting with Jeannie, how has your GSA and GSP been coordinating project development and funding with your IRWM region? What's the collaboration between the two groups?
Okay, so as we said, SGMA started about 10 years after the IRWM. So when SGMA planning started, there was a permanent line item added to our IRWM, or our Regional Water Management Group meeting agenda. So the 3 subbasins were reporting progress, announcing meetings and outreach opportunities, given any other type of updates that the IRWM group needed to be kept in the loop. When SGMA plans were submitted in 2020, it was discussed to pull all the projects out of the GSPs. So we went through all the GSPs, pulled all the projects out, and added them to the 2019 plan update that our region did. So we did our usual call for projects, but we ended up pulling those projects out and putting them in. And as we all know, 2020 was a little crazy. So with 2020 being a little crazy and the COVID, the shifting to work at home, the learning Zoom meetings, and we hired a new regional water management group administrator and all those things, we ended up going all the way into the September meeting. We voted all those projects in and added them to our IRWM project list. And then the next month, we voted them all in and added them all to our stormwater project list. And then voted at that point that any project that gets added to our SGMA or anything that came up through that, we would add them to both project lists, both the SGMA and the stormwater project list. With that, we ended up realizing that we did have some challenges besides the noise on my computer. We had other challenges. Sorry about that. We are in 2 funding areas. So we're with the Mountain County funding area and in the San Joaquin River funding area. So in any projects that we looked at, we had to keep in mind that that Mountain County funding area is that has nothing to do with SGMA. So we do everything double. The Mountain County funding area has their own issues, their own funding and all of that. So we have to keep that one going always. But the SGMA, we end up with the San Joaquin River funding area. So keeping both of those going at all times seems to be a challenge. And then the other challenge we have is having any of those projects shovel ready, because funding comes up, say with DWR, we know there's funding other places besides DWR, but when the funding comes up with DWR, we had to have whatever project is shovel ready. And a lot of times that wasn't the ones that we wanted. And that seemed to be one of our issues this last round of implementation funds. So we're working toward shovel-ready projects in the next round of implementation funds. So I guess the main benefit that we have with IRWM funding is not only the funding source, but maybe not even the sustainable funding source. It's that there's that box to check that everybody knows, it's on the list. And that at least the Madera region, it's the relationships that we have working together. We had those projects coming up. We had those relationships already in place. And so bringing those familiar faces and facing the new challenges that we have, that we learn to work together. So with our projects, as we said in the last question, they all fit because we're all looking at the same thing through the stormwater and through the SGMA, but having our people working together for those projects. We had to pull into DACs, make sure those are all covered, the disadvantaged communities. We have the DAC funding that we received in both funding areas, and just keeping it all going. So hopefully that answered that question.
Thank you, Jeannie. Several people have been trying to give helpful suggestions about the sound coming through. If you turned off your speaker, would that help? So just turn your speaker down for the noises coming through your computer.
If she mutes only while she's speaking, otherwise she won't know when we're asking her to speak.
Not right. Okay, you're up. Arne, you're taking the next question, which is, how have you coordinated stakeholder engagement, specifically of disadvantaged communities, and messaging across IRWM and SGMA?
Thanks, Lynn. So IRWM is much further along than the SGMA process and working with the disadvantaged communities and developing those stakeholder groups for them to plug into. And that has helped the GSAs tremendously over the process. IRWM and their groups provide not only a good email list of contacts for us to work with and get to them directly, but it's also the regular forums through those meetings provide updates to and accessibility to groups that wouldn't normally be engaged in a GSA. Not everybody is following the SGMA process, the GSP process. So our board meetings and our websites can only go so far and reach so many people. So the IRWM process is really helpful. And especially with the disadvantaged communities. Those meetings are attended by a broad scope, a lot of crossover, water agencies, Farm Bureau, Resource Conservation District, UC Ag Extension, but also a variety of nonprofits, local groups, NGOs, and the general public. I saw Brenton Kelly on the chat there. He's with the Cuyama Basin, and I got to point out that Cuyama Basin has the most engaged stakeholder process of all the GSAs I've been working with. This for the general public showing up. Those meetings are packed, they're translated into Spanish. And oddly, I don't think the IRWM was a big part of that. It could just be there's not much going on in Cuyama. And that's why there's a lot of focus. Also, they are 100% dependent on their local groundwater supply. So it's a different situation than the rest of Ventura County. The stakeholder engagement is easiest when you're building on what's established. And IRWM helped establish that first layer of getting those who are interested to the table, and we've been able to piggyback on that with SGMA. Definitely for disadvantaged communities, I think it was Prop 1 in whatever that was, 2014, that put a spotlight on disadvantaged communities and really allowed us to focus on their needs and in that water resources concept. Sorry, looking at some notes here, I mentioned that, the future, let me take it to the future here, because SGMA we're not at that level yet with our projects to go out for many of the projects, to go out not only to help the groundwater, but to help disadvantaged communities. And that's really where we're going to be plugging in to IRWM and SGMA. The intersection between groundwater and water quality and habitat and all that is getting closer and closer and closer due to SGMA. And there's a lot of common solutions to the different problems these different groups are seeing, whether it's disadvantaged community or habitat, the other NGOs. And that solution is quite often just put more water in the ground. It's going to solve stormwater pollution. It's going to solve some groundwater dependent ecosystems. It's going to provide groundwater resources for the future. So having these groups engage together through IRWM is a way to fine tune the multi of a project for better stakeholder support, for better grant applications and better success that way, and better overall water resource management.
Thank you, Arne. And I think I'll just tack on to that in Ventura County, we have so many mutual water companies, very small, fairly rural systems, and a number of them serve disadvantaged communities. So through this disadvantaged community involvement process that you mentioned, that's in our next phase. We are going to be zeroing in a little bit on some of those smaller mutuals that really need our help. So thank you.
I'm always amazed at the number. I think it's 184 small water agencies or mutual water agencies across the county.
Yeah, it's a lot. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So our last question is for Matt. And how do you measure both tangible and intangible benefits? So benefits to the environment, the economy, communities, and of the multi-benefit and integrated projects that GSPs and IRWM produce.
Like I said, I'm gonna loop back in on the criteria because it really applies on how do you do this. But I want to agree with what Jeannie said, the relationships that come out of this integrated planning and engaging your stakeholders and things. The IRWMP relationships were really one of the basis for the success of the GSP development. When we're talking about measuring those tangible, incommensurable, intangible benefits, what criteria do you use? To me, this is a huge opportunity for outreach and stakeholder engagement, and one of the most important places to involve them. I mean, when we were doing IRPs 30 years ago, it really was based on, the engineering solutions and the least cost engineering solution. And you could say, oh, the biggest yield as a criteria, very measurable thing. The dollar per acre foot yield, you build the cheaper increments first and you put that together in your IRP, and, you use your objectives established to do the screening to be consistent with NEPA and 404 permits. And it was very mechanical, engineering, and economic oriented. As we moved into, say, a more modern era of water resource and integrated planning, the cultural and community context really becomes very important, and it becomes that multi-objective. Now, the cynical side of me says, oh gosh, you open it up and everybody gets a chance to hang the ornaments on the tree till it tips over. But I think you can get people through the relationships to say, sunlight and share their objectives or their agendas, and everybody's got coming at this with some want, some ask to the process. And we know it's going to be money because that's the way we've set up California for bond funded projects. So you have to have ways of measuring the value of what's proposed, whether structural or non-structural. So you have to come up with a criteria with which to screen and or rank your projects. And you can do a first pass screening, fatal flaw, like if it's, binary, meets it, doesn't meet it, it's gone. Meets the objectives you established or doesn't meet it, it's gone. That's the way NEPA and CEQA work. So you can limit your focus. But when you're doing multiple objectives in this broad planning, everybody has things that they want or need out of the process. And it's our job to recognize that cultural and community context and try to manifest that and come up with criteria that factor in those both tangible, easily measured and quantified dollars per acre foot yield, and the intangibles. Well, because we really want to support our disadvantaged community, and that reflects our community values, although it's really hard to measure and throw into some easy cost benefit analysis. It might be big, broad thing like this suite of management actions will keep 25% of our wells from going over the MCL for nitrate. Oh, So how do you compare the apples and oranges on those, whether it's the intangibles in the environmental, maybe legal, social, or political realms, and people are bringing those things to the table. You have to figure out some way of comparing those apples and oranges. And the way I have done it in multiple areas is similar to the kind of the way you look at the way DWR weighs and ranks all of our grants. You have a table that says, here's the way we're going to measure this specific intangible thing that gives us a way of scaling it and giving it a numerical value. So I can, gauge community acceptance with creates the most habitat or creates the most recreational opportunities, and try to find ways of measuring that so you can assign a numerical value and apply those criteria to each of the projects and see how they score at the bottom. And then you can have the sausage making, which is the trading and the, which always comes into it at some point, the politics and the negotiation. And gosh, which one project are we going to submit from our basin for the most recent round of Prop 68 implementation? So knowing your objectives, knowing the criteria, which was developed and established through a lot of involvement to manifest those values and get everybody heard. When you do that kind of decision making and everybody had input to the criteria and how things would be scored, including how you might reprioritize by assigning different weights to things. And you see it in the grant application. You can get 1 through 5, but we're multiplying whatever you get by 3 because we think yield and contribution to solving overdraft is the highest priority. Everybody's heard, everybody had their fingerprints on the gun, and when you pull the trigger, we're submitting it for a $5 million or whatever Prop 68 implementation grant, people will align behind it. So those intangibles, you have to find a way of comparing apples to oranges, getting input. The tangible, I always say the engineering's the easiest. A lot of times some of the environmental's easiest. Acres impacted by or acres created for those things. But when it gets into doing hard economics, some of those things just don't measure. But there are obviously creative ways of putting some economic values on those, cost avoided, et cetera. But that's the challenge, to manifest the values, come up with ways of ranking and weighing the different alternatives. And some of those might be measured differently. Those programs that are related to how we're going to allocate shortage and do water marketing and meet our demand reduction targets from ag and urban areas might be evaluated separately from, we're going to prioritize a need to develop a fund for responding to problems with our small disadvantaged communities, either in yield or quality. That could be an offline thing in these types of documents. The big structural alternatives, I mean, the smart money still says least environmental impact, biggest yield for the least cost. That's pretty typical. And in these critically overdrafted basins is really pretty important in what it's supposed to be all about. IRWM's much broader, much more flexible. I keep telling communities I've worked with, look, just follow the protocol, make sure your plan meets the criteria, but make sure it really represents your values and what you want to do. Do that first, and then let the consultants and the pros figure out how to spin it for what it means in terms of the law. But once you know what you want to do, as Jeannie mentioned, whenever those different pools of funding come up, NRCS grants, state, fed, working with the Bureau or the Corps or whomever, you know what you want. You've got some alignment because of the relationships and the outreach you've done that you can plug in and tailor your grant application and say, yeah, it's in my IRWMP. Yes, it's in my SGMA document and my urban water management plan and my ag water management plan and stormwater management plan and all the assorted and sundry criteria that DWR is throwing at us. So that's my TED talk, and I'll turn it back over.
All right, well, thank you. You packed a lot into that discussion, and I think it's food for thought for sure. I think a lot of us have had these issues on our minds as we've gone through our planning efforts, and now as GSPs are being completed and there's maybe more integration between the IRWM and the sustainability process for SGMA, we'll see more of a need for that, and perhaps we can be sharing examples with one another about how we've successfully done that measurement. And I think DWR and other state agencies should be part of that conversation, because I think what we're able to measure locally may not match what the state would like to see. So figuring out how that would work, I think, is really important. And I want to just quickly put in a plug for how we've been working the Roundtable of Regions and DWR over IRWM issues. It's very much been a good conversation over the years, and a partnership of us at the local level explaining what challenges we face with some of the criteria and in the PSPs for IRWM funding. And I think they've certainly made changes to the process along the way based on our feedback. So I think we want to continue that conversation with DWR and other state agencies, and just make sure we can all be as streamlined and efficient and aligned as possible on all of these issues, and that they're doable from the local perspective. So thank you. One of the things that that was not on the questions, and perhaps will be for a future discussion, but I think we really do want to also address not only the underserved communities in terms of economic impact, but also tribal governments and tribal entities that we work with. And I know that probably Madera and San Joaquin are addressing some tribal issues directly, maybe perhaps a little more than Ventura, since we don't have as much organized tribal effort. But we have maybe just a few more minutes before we need to move into those questions. So does anybody on the panel want to address how you're working with your tribal governments in your area?
You know, I'll just touch on this. We've made some really dedicated efforts to outreach to our disadvantaged communities and engage NGOs that were good at that, and that really helped. The people that understand those communities, because our public works department, we typically, you know, we run CSAs and CSDs for some of these communities, but we don't have a lot of outreach experience there. And engaging the groups that do that on a regular basis was really helpful for us. Now, in terms of tribal, we do not have any registered tribes in San Joaquin County, but we have made efforts via DWR to know which tribes are closest to us, or most involved, or most engaged. And where we've really seen more tribal involvement is when we're doing project implementation, or actually when we're doing an environmental review, and we have to be very sensitive to cultural, historical resources, and have aspects of the mitigation, monitoring, and reporting plan be very sensitive to that, and be ready to have inspections and inspectors. So it's our tribal engagement, because we're building roads and pipelines and canals and land disturbing activities, we've had to engage with tribal representatives to make sure if we find cultural and historical resources that are important to that community, we respond. But in terms of engaging on the front end with the planning, it's been really hard to make that opportunity without registered and organized tribes. We try, we notice, we always ask, but it has been a challenge. And I don't want to minimize the importance of that or the complexity of it. It has been challenging.
We do have 2 registered tribes that we work with, and they're both on our, they're not disadvantaged communities, obviously, and they don't want to be thought of as that, but they are members, and they do have a vote on our regional water management group. They're also out of the, I know resource conservation districts is my background, that's where I came from. And we have 3 in the state tribal conservation districts, of which 2 of those 3 are in our county. So we work with those tribal conservation districts on projects. They have submitted projects to our plan. And so again, the issue is this has not anything to do with SGMA, but it does have to do with the IRWM, because both tribes are in the foothills of our region. So they're up in the Mountain County funding area. And when we did our disadvantaged community funding was given to both the valley and the foothills. In our foothill area, we did the DACTI, which was disadvantaged community tribal involvement. And we wrote actually a specific plan through that engagement. We had brought in 7 different tribes and brought them all together in our region, in our Madera area, and got all of their feedback. And it actually worked out really well. So we try to engage them whenever we do a call for projects and whenever we're doing any of our outreach to make sure they're comfortable with it.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeannie. I know I threw that out as kind of a last minute thing, but I appreciate your responses. Arne, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Not really. Our local Chumash Foundation was very, very vocal a few years back, but it's been quiet lately, and I don't think we've done anything special to reach out to them.
Okay. All right, thank you. You'll see that Emily posted in the chat for more information about tribal engagement. You can go to some links. And I know that DWR's website has a whole page on tribal engagement and guidelines for collaboration with tribes as part of groundwater sustainability planning. So that may be the topic, a specialized topic of a future webinar for this group. So we're just a tiny bit ahead of schedule. I think I just want to really quickly recap a few things that I heard from this panel, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And I see that lots of questions have been coming in, so that's great. Obviously, one of the themes of IRWM and also to some extent SGMA is collaboration, both voluntary and mandatory. And I was just recently reading a report prepared by Tim Quinn as part of Stanford's Water in the West program. And you may know he used to be the executive director of Aqua and also the executive director of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. And I just want to read a quote from his document because I think this underscores a lot of what we're hearing today about the intangible effects and benefits of IRWM. And he said that one of the key lessons over recent decades in the 21st century is that collaboration works and conflict doesn't. And the whole report actually goes into a lot of the background and the history of development of water policy in California and water development in general. And that we've really reached a point now where we do have to rely on those relationships and that collaboration to be successful. And I think that was highlighted by all 3 of the speakers, the fact that they were able to build on the existing IRWM effort and the relationships that were established there in order to work through the issues that they're facing through their groundwater sustainability planning. And it's been great to hear the specific examples that have been provided by the speakers about how they're doing with that process, and in particular, how projects are evaluated. A lot of similar criteria is established, I think, for IRWM plan projects that get funded versus those in groundwater sustainability plans. So we can sort of build on what we learned through the IRWM process for inclusion of projects in the plans and also for funding. And moving forward, that collaboration for future funding, which probably most of the GSPs are still seeking, identifying which projects they're going to implement and finding funding for that. So that will be a nice partnership to have with their local IRWM region going forward. Just a few themes. I'll do a little bit of wrap up when we're all done, but why don't we go ahead and go straight to the questions that we haven't already touched on. Put on my glasses. So it's really hard to do reading glasses and computer reading, and I'm going to have to turn away from my screen. One question that was asked is about how was the water market administered? And I don't know if that's directed at you, Arne, probably.
I'll take it. So when we started with the water market, it was the pumpers really didn't want the agency to be the exchange administrator. They wanted it to be kind of a third party, neutral, but just a complete hands-off third party running the market. And so we've contracted with Cal Lutheran University to be the exchange administrator. And they're the ones who handle the transfer of funds and match bids with offers in kind of a unique way. And I don't want to go into those details. And then as far as just some simple water market rules, you can't offer water, and again, no water's changing hands. It's the pumping allocation. So the real overriding rule is we don't want any purchases in the market to drive pumping in areas we don't want pumping. So if you're in the seawater intrusion area, you can only purchase pumping allocation from somebody else in that area. You can't purchase allocation from anywhere in the basin and start pumping there and exacerbate a problem. But I think as far as your question about how is it administered, it's there was a growers group got together. They helped define the rules, what kind of metering technology verifications would be needed, and they're the ones who also decided they would have a third party be essentially like the stock exchange, the ones who's handling the money and handling the bids and trades.
Okay. Thank you, Arne. If no one else on the panel wants to address that question as well, then I will actually go back up to the top of the list of the questions that Emily has put together. So if GSP projects all went into the IRWM plan, how do you deal with GSPs being mandatory and IRWM being voluntary? Does anybody want to tackle that question?
I guess I can grab that, a start anyway. Well, part of what we looked at when we did it is that yes, the GSP is a law, the SGMA is a law, I should say. SGMA is a law and IRWM is highly recommended. And so with that, we looked at the IRWM being the possibility of funding, the first round of funding, the first way to get funding with all of those projects that are going to be needed to reach that sustainability by 2040. Where else are we going to go for the big dollars? Yes, there is new funding coming out just for SGMA, so that's great. But again, it's grants, and so grants are never, promised forever. So using the IRWM and the IRWM project list as a possibility for funding sounded more sustainable, only because there's, as Matt had said, there's those boxes you have to check off. And so if any other funding does come out, say from the state, there's been Department of Conservation funding, Department of Water Resources funding, any other state funding, we can check off that box. And so having one as a law and one as not a law, I don't think that's going to be the issue. We're all going to have to get there in 20 years. And so that part of the law is a for sure. And so just having it on the list with IRWM gives that box to check off if any of that other funding comes in. And we're always going to be looking because there's matching it with the stormwater resource or matching it with flood. Our department does flood management. That's one of the three things in our department that's with the Water and Natural Resources Department for the county. We do SGMA, which is groundwater. We do stormwater or flood management, which is stormwater. And then we also do watershed health, which is going to be the IRWM. That's where it falls in. So mixing those together, it just gives you that possibility of just a broader amount of funding, and having that box to check off gives you that definite where you can go to those other funding sources.
Right, that was great. Thank you, Jeannie. Does anybody else want to jump in? We still have quite a few questions to go through. Does anybody have anything to add to that before I move on?
Yeah, I'll just chime in. My experience here in Ventura County is the growers, they want more water. They would rather have more water than have cuts, and they are showing a willingness to pay for that. And if that moves faster than IRWM and waiting for grants, they will move faster. And it goes to what Jeannie just said, that there's a law and they are going to be facing this. And so they are highly motivated at this time to make themselves whole.
Thank you.
I'll pile on that real quick. the thing with the law is you do it and you maintain local control, which also means finding local funding to do the stuff you say you're going to do and not being solely reliant on state bonds and grant funding. Or you lose control to the state and set yourself up for state intervention where they're not going to care. They're going to be able to come in and they have the power under the statute to come in and say, we are going to charge you X amount of money. And they put their numbers out there on the webpage per acre foot of pump water to implement some kind of management program, and you might not like it. That's a highly motivational thing for the local growers that realize, holy mackerel, either we cut back or we find increased supplies. Oh, and if we have to cut back, like in a lot of areas, we're really looking at what's the least painful way and the most equitable way of doing that through some planning process that isn't an adjudication, that involves contentious, nasty litigation, which is everybody fighting to preserve some modicum of local control and individual on-farm liberty, which is always the last thing to be thought about in front of a judge and will be the last thing to be thought about in front of the state board. So we have the common threat of state intervention. It remains to be seen how serious they're going to be in terms of applying this under the law. And I don't want to be the case study in that. And I know that the critically overdrafted basins are all going, oh my God, we do not want to be, you know, the poster child for the state's exercise of authority. And we're all guessing at what that looks like. So it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for responding to that question. Let's go to this question. How is ag being involved in both structural and non-structural projects?
They're expected to pay for it. I mean, in our area, because it is so ag-centric, anything we do to raise the revenues, whether that's through Prop 218 or 26 type of initiative or activities, or really using the SGMA authorities that say, you know, we still have to follow some aspects of 26 and 218 to put an assessment on pumping. And the biggest pumpers are ag, so they're the ones that are going to have to make the choices on, are they willing to pay, and would they support and sustain some type of financing mechanism to actually build the stuff that is and makes it in the plan. Obviously, they want to see increased water supply, and so the bias on any program and towards any vote is going to be predicated on, does it look like we got a whole lot of padding and cushion and things in there that are nice and sexy and manifest other values, but it really boils down to how is ag going to be assessed to pay for things. And that's what I've encountered anyway in all of these primarily ag basins that are facing urban demand growth and things. And are there ways of subsidizing that?
Okay. Arne, were you going to say something?
Pretty much the same. They're going to have to pay for the projects, but the other ones, if it's fallowing, their ag is going to be heavily involved in that, in a non-structural way to increase yield. So, and how that works, you know, we haven't determined, or, you know, are we going to pay people to fallow, but it's still going to be an impact to the bottom line.
Thank you. Jeannie, did you want to add anything to that?
No, not really. I know when he was saying that fallowing and stuff, I mean, we're looking at some different projects right now. And one of them is the sustainable agricultural land conservation, where we're looking at what it would cost to fallow, or retire, maybe not permanently, land for agriculture. I mean, we're highly agricultural here too. So there's a lot of it to look at. A lot of different options.
Okay, thank you. Another question here for Arne regarding the water markets. Where to go? So how do you apply stormwater capture within the water market?
Oh, currently there's no supply side to the water market like that. It's strictly a trading of allocation available to pump under Fox Canyon rules right now. So everybody, it's a cap and trade. You get a cap of how much you're allowed to pump, and then you can trade some amount of that. If you buy more, you have a higher allocation. If you sell some of that, you have a lower allocation for the end of the year.
Okay. Don't go anywhere, Arne, because there's another question for you. This water markets are very popular. So in the pilot program that you're doing, their AMIs were required to be installed. Where did that funding come from, and how was the implementation managed, and who was paying for maintenance of the meters?
Okay, that was a big portion of getting this water market off the ground. So first off, where'd the money come from? We got a grant from sub-awarded grant from the Nature Conservancy, who got an NRCS Conservation Innovation Grant, the water market being the innovation there. And that paid for advanced metering infrastructure, and selecting that advanced metering type that would work with the water market was a big process. And we decided on one that actually has optical sensors, basically a camera, spy camera on the meter on the well. But that gave solid evidence of what's been pumped out of that well, so you could knew they had the water to trade. The big concern was that somebody would be putting water up on the market and pumping it as well. So that's where the money came from. So we got a contract, got those installed, and the next big discussion point was who owns that. If the agency is the one who has the grant and is paying for it to be installed, should the agency own that metering infrastructure? But they don't own the actual meters, and the meters being an integral part of the business of growing the whole plumbing section. The growers did not want the agency owning the meters or the AMI, the optical sensors reading the meters. And I should say they're basically cell phones that send the information once a day. And so the decision was made that the agency will pay for it through the grant, but it ultimately becomes the responsibility of the grower or the pumper to maintain it. And it's not just the pumpers who are in the water market who are required to have the AMI. Everybody in the agency is required to have the AMI. So it's a level playing field, and everybody was eligible for the grant. And amazingly, only 2/3 of the wells chose to take the grant money. Others went other directions for AMI as well. But the bottom line is they wanted the independence of owning and maintaining and being able to select what equipment they want on their business infrastructure there at the well.
All right, thank you, Arne. Arne, you may want to post your contact information in the chat, because I think there might be some more follow-up questions for you in the future, and you're kind of leading the way on this one. So, okay, we still have a number of really great questions left, and we're going to try to wrap up in a little less than 10 minutes. So I'm just going to go through here. One question, and I think this could be the future, a topic of a future discussion, but it would be great to see Matt's examples of how the intangibles are measured, as that is a struggle for a lot of IRWM and stormwater groups. And I know that possibly answering that question, Matt, could take a while. So I don't know if you want to just really quickly say if you have the capability to share some of that information offline with folks or in a future meeting.
I think that would have to be a future meeting.
Okay.
But I've collected, and through Roundtable of Regions, there was, at one point I had a big fat file with all of the different criteria that people were using and methods to rank and weigh those. And this is something I've encouraged DWR to try to do on key topics like that, to do, evaluate it as if they were pilot and demonstration projects, or fund pilot and demonstration, and bring all those pieces together that show here are 20 different examples and ways that people came up with criteria to screen, rank, and weigh the different alternatives. I think that would be really valuable. I'm not in consulting anymore. I'd be happy to sell everybody some of my time. And now I'm jealously guarding it. But I would love to see some of those, and we can do it through webinars or meetings, or try to encourage some of that kind of aggregation of the information. I see that on who's doing what and how for funding, who's doing what for how for communication, stakeholder engagement and outreach, and who's doing things like how do you rank and weigh the various projects. And it's can be very mechanical.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think there is a lot of interest in that subject. So we'll put that on the burner for future discussion in other venues. There's a question here about carbon farming and how that gets included in the work that's being done in the 3 regions. I know we have some work on that topic in Ventura County. I don't know about if Arne wants to address that, if you're familiar with that, Arne.
Sorry, I'm not.
I can comment on that, because in the Delta, there's a lot of big questions on what to do with the islands, how to use the islands. There's land subsidence due to the degradation of the soils, not the classic clay compaction. And they're looking at alternative ways of generating farm revenue. And a lot of that dialogue is going on through the Department of Conservation, Natural Resource and Conservation, and through a group that we're very active in, the Delta Counties Coalition. But I know DWR and folks have thought a lot about the carbon market and how the Delta factors in. And I'm not right in the middle of all that, but I know it's kind of on the edge of what the discussions are. So DWR and Department of Natural Resource and Conservation are thinking about that, and how that plays into the IRWMs. I don't know how it plays into SGMA. I don't see a connection right now, other than, no, I just don't see a connection right now.
Okay. Anybody else before I move on to another question? We've had a few questions here that had to do with the IRWM regions, kind of the future of IRWM post funding in Prop 1, which is the last water bond that has designated funds for that. And previous water bonds were not, that were looked at last year, and the ones this year do not include IRWM. And then we had a question about IRWM meetings. Are IRWM meetings in your area well attended, and therefore an effective way to reach stakeholders and decision makers across multiple GSAs and GSPs? Have you found it to be an appropriate place to have regional SGMA related conversations? And I'm just gonna, Arne, answer that question for Ventura County, because we do have 3 watershed groups associated with our IRWM program. And at each one of our IRWM, at each round meeting of the watershed groups, as well as the whole group, we try to address the status of development of GSPs, and we have dialogue back and forth among our stakeholders about the program. And we have 7 active kind of umbrella GSAs working in our region, so we get reports back from them. Matt and Jeannie, do you want to address that? How well you do that overlap or integration between?
With our IRWM, we have great attendance for our meetings. And what's interesting is that's one thing that I know a couple of the individuals that have been a part of it forever, as I have, is they're proud of, because we've been doing this for over 10 years, and we meet 11 months out of 12. We take December off, and we've been doing that the whole time. We haven't pared down. We've had conversations every now and again, but we haven't pared down to quarterly. We haven't pared down to every other month. We meet every month in those 11 months. And we actually, when we weren't doing Zoom and before COVID, we met in 3 different locations, and we rotated those. So one up in the foothills, and then one east side, one west, or I guess it's south and north actually, of the one in Chowchilla and one in Madera. So the 2 different cities in the valley, so to allow people to be able to get there, so the people in the foothills didn't have to drive to the valley and vice versa. So they had the opportunity to be a part of the group, and it seemed to work. And now on Zoom, it's even more, because people don't have to travel. So we have a packed house every month, which is really good. and it keeps people involved. And as I stated earlier, we have SGMA as one of the line items, and it has been since SGMA has been a law and has started, so that all of the GSAs can report out, or subbasins basically can report out on their meetings and their engagement opportunities and so forth. We also use the IRWM email list as part of our interested parties list, so they receive everything that our SGMA people, and our SGMA people receive everything that the IRWM people receive. So our new county newsletter, our any invitations to any of our workshops, and we seem to do a whole lot of those with all of our different programs. And actually, if you go to, here's a plug, MaderaCountyWater.com, you can see each one of our individual pages of each one of our individual projects. And Regional Water Management Group has a page on there, as well as CV salts, water market, recharge, flood, natural resources. There's several different pages on MaderaCountyWater.com that you can go to and get any of the information for either group and any of the projects that either group is working on.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much for that. We are about out of time for the questions, and there's still several really good questions remaining. And after the first webinar, the same thing happened. We ran out of time, and I really want to be able to find a way to address some of these questions. I'm just going to really quickly say what they are, and I think we need to park those for future discussion in these meetings or offline between the meetings. A question of assuming eventually there will need to be a major investment of state money in order to help regions deal with the impacts of bringing groundwater usage into sustainable conditions. Should the money be mostly made available to GSAs, or should the state steer a large portion of its investment towards IRWMs? And obviously that's sort of subject to the legislature, but that's a really good question. And then the question about, with the recognition that IRWM funding from the state will be ending soon, how is your area planning to wind down IRWM? Or is your area planning to wind down? I guess that's a better question. Is there any official migratory or integration into GSAs? That's another really excellent question. And I think that those actually lend themselves well to another session, and I think we should kind of park those. And then there was a question here about water quality concerns associated with IRWM and SGMA, and how do the GSPs help work collaboratively with the Central Valley Water Board's new nitrate control? That's a very specialized question, regionally, but it probably does apply across the state to some extent. So I apologize that we did not get to that, and a couple of other questions down here at the bottom, but to keep our promise that we would keep you all an hour and a half, we'll park those questions and address them at another time. I really want to thank everybody that participated today for your involvement in this. I want to really thank the panelists. It was great to have your individual perspectives. There was a lot of overlap. All three of you have had a great deal of experience working on these issues, and I encourage folks, I think all of you may have put in the chat how to contact you, and that way people can reach out to you directly if they have some follow-up questions. I have a couple of just wrap-up points that I wanted to make really quickly. Themes from today.
And say goodbye, everybody. Thank you. It's been my pleasure, but I have to run.
Thank you, Arne. And I don't want to forget, I will thank Chris Austin and Emily Finnegan for all of the work they did putting this together. But just really quickly, some of the themes that came out of today, that the difference between IRWM and SGMA, IRWM being voluntary and SGMA being mandatory, has created a little bit of friction between the two, but also a lot of opportunities, and that a lot of the GSPs or GSAs have been able to build off of the work that was conducted through IRWM, which preceded it. Just to also say that tangible versus intangible benefits, that's a huge theme, I think, of IRWM, and certainly something that relates to the implementation of SGMA to some degree. And I think just basically, you know, all the challenges that we all face in California with the future of water management is something that we have to work collaboratively to resolve. It does take a lot of coordination, particularly when you think about all the plans involved. As Matt pointed out, there's so many different plans that impact the future of water. And it is challenging for all of us in IRWM to try to sort through and keep track of all of that, but it is very beneficial when we're able to do that. And looking forward to future dialogue about the nexus between SGMA and IRWM. I think these sessions have been really valuable in helping us identify how we can help each other and work together, you know, for future sustainable groundwater, as well as just water resilience in California in general. So I want to thank you all for your part in that. You will receive a follow-up message from Chris Austin at Maven's Notebook with links to the recording. And, you know, perhaps we can talk about this, Chris, about adding some of those other questions and finding ways for us to keep collaborating on these important questions that came up today. So thank you all so much for your participation. Our next, do we have another poll, Chris?
Yes, actually we do.
Okay.
Yeah. And the next topic is going to be coordination across IRWM and SGMA on groundwater recharge. Okay, so our last poll is what topics you'd like to see addressed in future IRWM and SGMA webinars. If you have an idea for a topic you'd like to see addressed and it's not on the list, or if you want to be added to the list to be notified of upcoming webinars, please send me an email at maven@mavensnotebook.com. And thank you for coming today, and everyone have a great afternoon.
And you're going to hold this open while people vote, right?
Oh, yes, yes. We'll leave it open for a while.
Thank you all for participating. And I think we'll be looking at the next session being sometime in, well, about 3 months from now.
Thanks all for your interest.
Yeah, thank you all the panelists.
Yeah.
And Lynn.
That was awesome.
Hey, how come you guys didn't let us take the polls?
I know I couldn't upvote questions either. I was like, what's up with that?